was managing a department. I had to have meetings, I had to give talks, I had to do presentations. And I remember at Apple in the middle of a training exercise for a bunch of managers, and then just going, who's standing up here talking, really looking in. And then just like I was another person, I was just floating awareness in the room. There's Dan waving his arms and pointing at the board and going on, and I have nothing to do with it. It's just running on its own. Experiencing that sense of space was just very profound. It never left.
Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of conversations with spiritually awakening people. I've done 730 something of them now, and if you are not familiar with this and you'd like to check out the archive, go to batgap.com, BATGAP, and you'll see them categorized in various ways. This program is made possible through the support of appreciative listeners and viewers. That's really our only means of support. So if you appreciate it and would like to help support it, there are PayPal buttons on every page of the site, and a page about alternatives to PayPal. Also, it helps in terms of viewership if you like and subscribe and so on. When you're watching a YouTube video, it helps with Google's algorithm in terms of making the thing accessible to more people. So my guest today is Dan Kelso, and Dan worked at a number of companies as a human factors engineer. He can, if he wants, he can explain to us what human factors is, but it's not too relevant to our interview. Dan's first love was always spiritual exploration. In 2011, after a number of years of trial and error, refining the process of self-inquiry into deep self-investigation, there came an undeniable recognition that he was not a separate self, simply no one at all. There was only the selfless aware existence. This became his permanent condition. Soon after, from a certain perspective, Dan left a successful corporate position and his old life, following an intuitive impulse to be in a more free, natural, and creative circumstance. He now lives with his wife, Victoria, in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, loving nature, exploring various forms of artistic expression, and guiding others to awakening. I read Dan's book, Deep Self-Investigation, A Modern Guide to Awakening, and a lot of our conversation will be based upon that. So, Dan, welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Somebody from Scotland, let's see his name, David Hill, sent in a question, which is a good opening question, which is, how did you discover deep self-investigation while having no free will, he asks. And that's another question we might get into, whether we do have free will. There's a lot of these paradoxical questions that I think we're going to tussle with today.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a deeper, a pretty deep question.
Maybe you should start by just explaining what DSI is. Yeah.
Either one.
Whatever.
So deep self-investigation, it's really just a modified, maybe in some ways updated for Western thought, version of self-inquiry, which is an ancient practice and is, I think most people know it in the non-dual or Advaita lineage in India and in the East, but you see it cropping up in philosophy and even in some ways, I would say neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing that, like Sam Harris, I think.
I was just thinking of him.
That connection, yeah. So it's not, and so deep self-investigation or DSI is really just the way I made that more palatable in my own experience, trying to investigate this sense of self that seems so persistent.
Mm-hmm. And what is the problem with having a sense of self, if there is a problem?
Well, and
maybe you should also define what do we mean by sense of self? I mean, because I think it has many flavors or many points on a spectrum of what it could be.
Well, yeah. So initially, I think the sense of self, if as let's say, relatively speaking, as somebody's reflecting on it, it's more how they think of themselves. So who they are as a person, are they a man or a woman, their job, their the things they like, their hobbies, their it starts on that level. And then but I think as you investigate that, you go, well, I'm a postman, but I'm not really a postman. I just do postal service. So that's not exactly who I am. So I think as you begin to look at it and question it, you gradually and naturally, I think, drop through sort of the universal layers of that, this superficial layer of labels, and then there's I'm a body, or I'm a body mind. And then as you look at that, it's the same thing. If I lose a part of my body, do I go with it? Am I now in two locations at once? So I think it just progresses through that. And then you end up with very subtle elements of yourself. It's like, well, I'm not exactly the body, and I'm not exactly the mind, but I seem to be in there somewhere. And so we begin to explore this subtle sense of who we are. So I don't know if you want me to answer the first question, like what's the problem?
Well, let me bounce back something to you now, and then we can keep going. So are you familiar with the Advaita Vedanta breakdown of the personality structure? There's a bunch of layers that they outline.
Yeah. In traditional Advaita.
Yeah. So you have the Annamaya Kosha, which is the physical body.
I think you're more familiar with it than I am. So
maybe I'm going to rattle it off for a second. So you have the Annamaya Kosha, which is the physical body, and Anna means food. It's made of food. And then you have the Pranamaya Kosha, which is breath. And then you have the Manomaya Kosha, which is mind. And then the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is intellect. And then the Anandamaya Kosha, which is said to be the bliss sheath. All these are said to be sheaths, like Russian dolls.
Okay.
And then beyond all that, you have the Atman, which is not really individual anymore. But so there's all these individual structures and serving as a kind of instrument through which the Atman is reflected, resulting in the ability to live life.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I was intentional about doing with this is keeping it on the direct experiential level, staying with my direct experience. Like what did I see in my present experience, and exploring from there. So while I did touch on, literature and scripture around it, and those do sound familiar.
Yeah.
I generally tend to, I usually don't describe it in those terms, and although it fits with what I was just talking about, so I see why you brought that.
That's why I brought it up. Yeah.
But I'm a little. I think I tend to shy away from it to say with, well, what can I prove directly? What do I know in my direct experience? And you end up describing it in different ways based on that versus maybe what literature might say in terms of the sheaths and so on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think that's great. It's a scientific approach, which I really believe in. I believe spirituality should be pursued scientifically. In other words, empirically, based upon what you can actually experience. Not sort of going off in intellectual flights of fancy. But sometimes these intellectual structures are useful. And these cultures have been studying this stuff for thousands of years. And like you say, the Inuit have like 30 names for snow because they're so familiar with snow. And so these guys, they have all these different names for consciousness and all these subtle nuances that Western psychology hasn't even considered yet.
So one of the things I think, too, that's important with this is that we're steering away from the intellect, so toward more what I would call perception or bare noticing versus conceptualizing. So basically steering clear of that, because there's such a strong habit to go to the mind for answers and go to representations. And even if you speak with most people, they don't really know the difference between what they think about what's going on and what they're directly experiencing is going on. And there tends to be a heavy overlay. So I think over the years just became very shy about venturing into that. Still noting it, if I would read something, I would think, okay, this sounds relevant. but then now I got it. Now I'm going to move on and let me verify it. So and I like that you said it's scientific. It's very much follows, I think, the scientific method. Observe, report, keeping it accurate means really not assuming anything, So I think that in that sense, it very much follows a scientific spirituality approach.
Yeah. To someone who is just, thinking about this stuff, I might say, okay, now think about lunch. Mm-hmm. All right. You still hungry? Yeah. Okay. Think some more.
Yeah.
But I'm still hungry. All right.
Right.
Let's eat, and have the actual experience.
Yeah. Just keep thinking till you're full.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is an important point. So there's knowledge and experience, and I think they complement and supplement and reinforce each other. There can be a mutual confirmation value, but neither alone is generally adequate. Would you agree with that?
I would say, I think what we're leaving out is the interference factor.
Which is what?
So if we think of attention as having a limited amount of, a limited scope of what can be attended to, mm-hmm. then focusing attention on thought is, in a sense, it's displacing time that could be focused on investigating, exploring, in, like I said, this more perceptual kind of way on the level of direct noticing. So I think that's where I see it becoming problematic. I don't think that, I don't believe in getting rid of the mind, trying to destroy thoughts, trying to decrease thoughts. But I also recognize that there is a factor of interference going on in that thoughts tend to occupy attention. So in that way, I would say, I would approach it with, particularly when it comes to something like self-investigation, because we're dealing with things, particularly as it gets deeper, we're dealing with levels of the sense of being of individual self that is very subtle and it doesn't really require thought it really requires just careful looking and almost like a photographic plate, when they take these photographs of astronomical, like a nebula. Well, they let the plate sit there and just absorb photons for extended periods of time. I mean, it can go on for hours and it gets more detailed that way. And I think that's the way attention works. It's like a photographic plate. You just put it there, you aim it at this, and you begin to this cumulative absorption of the detail of what's there. Because that whole point is to see what's there clearly and recognize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Do you find that the mind settles down more and more while you do that? Or it doesn't remain agitated and fluttery so much?
Yeah, it tends to. That tends to have that side effect of, it's almost like you're depriving thought of energy, and so it will naturally kind of go into and you could say this is very much a contemplative or meditative. I like contemplative because it feels more like the reflection that goes on with this, which does have a nice calming effect, not just on thought and the mind, but the body, and so physiologically.
Yeah. It reminds me of the first couple of verses of the Yoga Sutras. One of them said, the first, or maybe it's the second verse, says yoga, which means union, or merging with the self, capital S. Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. The vrittis, or the excitations of the mind, settle down. And then the next verse says, and then the seer rests in the self. The analogy is often used to like agitated water trying to reflect sunlight. It doesn't get a very clear reflection, but if the pond is just like mirror smooth, then the reflection of the sunlight can be brilliant.
Right.
Yeah.
Great example.
Okay. And I wonder how I've been practicing meditation since the 60s, and the way I've practiced it, it fits the description I just gave, where the mind settles down more and more. And as it does so, there's just awareness expands, there's less and less constriction, and at times, unboundedness and real clarity. But there's no intellectual process involved. What you're describing sounds to me a little bit more volitional, or a little bit more, systematic, in terms of one being engaged in some kind of inner inquiry. Right. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, I would say, and this almost gets back to that original question by Scott, I think.
Yes.
Where it's like, how can you do it? How do you do this if there's nobody?
I think it was Dave, but he was from Scotland. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Scott from Scotland. So the thing is, at the beginning, if there is no self, the way we think of ourselves, the way we conceive of ourselves, if there's not a separate self, then how is this all happening? How does what looks like personal intention, action take place? So what we begin to see is that, and in this process of self-investigation, you start seeing not this, not this, not this, right? The neti process. And eventually there's nothing left. And yet action takes place, thought takes place, everything about the character, what I call the character, continues to operate, but there's not really somebody doing it.
So who's doing it?
Well, why?
What's doing it?
Here's the question. That's a little different question, but that whole idea that somebody or something needs to do it is that's built into the way of thinking of separate selves. Mm-hmm. Well, somebody's got to do it for it to happen. But we would never say that about the weather. Well, who's generated the clouds? Unless you went into more of a religious description of that, well, God's doing it or something like that.
Yeah, you could get into laws of nature and temperature and pressure differentials and the rotation of the earth and all kinds of factors.
Right. Yeah.
So natural phenomena are doing it.
We would say it's happening, and there's an interplay, and there's a kind of a network of interrelated connections to it, but we don't have to insert anything personal into it. We don't even have to conceive of a giant entity called God. We can just say, we can, and I think a lot of this is the tricky part, because it seems almost like a little bit of New Age spirituality, but we can. It's funny, sometimes I lost my train of thought there. I was going to make a subtle.
You want me to say something and get you going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about the weather, that your analogy, and I mean, human beings are different than the weather. A cloud doesn't say, "I think I'll go over and marry that cloud," or "I think I'd like this for lunch," or "I'm going to become a meteorologist," or something. Those are just natural phenomena. Human beings, however, they appear to have volition, and they appear to make decisions and to take initiative and to be attracted to things or repelled by things. And there's all kinds of stuff that human beings do, and even squirrels for that matter, that clouds and rain and stuff like that don't appear to do.
Well, I would say that's what thinking tends to tell us. That's what conditioned thought, that's the conventional view is, well, we're different from nature in that way. Mm-hmm. But I would say, from my experience, there's no difference at all. So, for example, I would say, well, which one of these bodies is mine? Am I inhabiting this body and not inhabiting that one? So the sense of these two bodies, the Rick on that end, the Dan on this end, the direct experience of that is they're both objects in awareness. And so everything that happens that looks like Dan doing something that's different from clouds moving through the sky, that it only seems that way if you think about it. If there's attention on thought about it that says, well, this is how I'm going to interpret this. This is different. This is within the human experience. This is outside the human experience. But so part of what happens with this is you begin to see that that's actually an arbitrary framework to put on things and not necessary. I think that's the thing is it really necessary? But that can seem, that can be a big step if it's like, no, but it just seems so personal and that seems so impersonal. So I get the maybe the confusion about that or might disagree with that, but
yeah. My comeback to that would be that there is an impersonal dimension and there's a personal dimension, and we don't have to reside exclusively in one or the other. And I'm not even sure if we can. Now, most people are unaware of the impersonal dimension, with awareness, as you call it, and some people identify more with the awareness dimension to the point of kind of dismissing the reality of the personal dimension. But let me take an analogy. So, let's say a wave considers itself totally, autonomous and separate from all the other waves and everything. And then at some point it realizes, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually the ocean. I'm just a wave on the ocean. And all these other waves are made of the same stuff as I am. So that gives me a much vaster picture on what my existence actually is. But still, I'm a wave. I'm primarily the ocean, but in a manifest sense, I'm a wave, and I'm the same stuff as that wave over there, but I'm also different. And it's a kind of a both and way of looking at it.
So what you're saying, sorry, I pulled my headset off for a second there. I missed the very beginning, but you're saying you see two different dimensions here. One's the personal dimension, and then there's an impersonal dimension. Is that how it started out?
Yeah. And I'll throw another Vedanta term at you. They use the term vyavaharika, which means transactional reality. So there's a reality that is, our day-to-day practical experience, and then there's the underlying reality that it's all Brahman, and the two coexist. They're actually not in conflict. You don't step in front of buses thinking, oh, it's all Brahman, it's not going to matter. It does matter on the transactional level, even though ultimately you and the bus are all Brahman. But then the blood and gore is going to be all Brahman if you do that.
Yeah, which could happen.
Right.
So what happens if we just say, do we need a sense of self for all that to take place? I would say no. A sense of self, a sense of individual being is not necessary for all that to be true and as it is. That actions take place, that individuals step out of the way of buses. So part of this, and I actually got this from the conversation I heard you having with somebody about is the self annihilated that we talked about earlier.
Right. Susanna Marie, she and I had a conversation that's on her YouTube channel.
Is that the sense of self, when it is seen for what it is, the sense of individuation, the sense of being identical to the body mind, we realize it's a fiction. It's simply not real. It's as a thought, it seems real. As a direct experience, it not only is it not findable and identifiable and provable and verifiable, it's not necessary for things to continue to happen. But so I would say that it all looks impersonal is fun. It's a funny word because it makes it sound like it's dry and kind of dead like space or something, but it's not like that at all. I mean, there's something amazing going on here. Really, truly, every moment. And it doesn't, this sense of self just is an obscuration to that going on. And it's so unnecessary. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, good. No, you go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Keep going. As long as you are on a roll, keep rolling. On a roll,
yeah. So I think part of this is, what we're doing, we're looking and going, well, is it really necessary? Do I really believe that? Is that my actual, and ultimately, is that my actual experience? That these things that you talk about as human plans, do you actually have a direct experience of a real self, planning, strategizing, managing, and creating these events. And I would say that sense of you is a projection into that, is purely, it's what I call in the book, I talk about the I cluster. At the center of the I cluster is basically this sense, this I thought. And around it is the body, circumstances, a story, a narrative. That all kind of makes up the cluster, right? Feelings, etc. But as we go through that, we go, well, am I identical to this feeling or to this thought? If you were identical to your thoughts, then how could you continue to be them if they keep changing? And completely, some of them are completely gone. Did you feel like you vanished with them, for example? So that would be a way of directly verifying, well, am I my thoughts? Same with like the body. If parts of the body were gone or set aside, would you feel like you went with them? Did you split up? So very quickly we get a clear sense that we're not identical to these things. So then what's left of this I sense? So I think that's the thing that drove this from the beginning was a curiosity and an interest, early on in my 20s. And also an intuitive sense that there's something fishy about this sense of identity. There's just something fishy about it. And I would call that just an intuition, that somehow I felt, I got to check this out. I got to find out what this is about.
Yeah. I would say that of course, you're not your thoughts and you're not your body. And although there is something which is aware of your thoughts and your body and your feelings and all that stuff. And so it would make more sense to suggest that you are that which is aware of the things rather than the things themselves. And that awareness obviously persists, it abides, it doesn't come and go. Whereas the old movie screen analogy, the screen always stays, the movies keep playing.
Right. Which I just want to mention is very different from any conventional idea of a sense of self.
Just conventional meaning common, normal, everyday.
Common, or even conventional within the spiritual circles, in spiritual circles. The way you just described, what we seem more to be as awareness, I think it's a very good description. And I think it's very uncommon. You've already disregarded thought and feeling and the body. So like all the major players are out of the picture there. So, but yeah. I interrupted. So
no, it's okay. No, it's not. I mean, if anybody's read any Vedanta books or anything, it's not that uncommon. This kind of idea has been around for thousands of years and is certainly in vogue these days with those who study these things. But maybe we could call the things we're describing, thought and body and emotions and everything else, or even the sense of self. There's a word for that in Sanskrit. It's called ahamkara, which means I maker. And it's considered in these traditions that it's not something that is utterly eradicated, but that's the identification with it falls away, not the function itself. And some would argue that a functional I sense remains necessary for basic human functioning, like knowing foot from floor and finger from knife when you're cutting vegetables and things like that. And that there will still be opinions and tastes which might even get amplified with awakening. I'm sorry to be throwing so many little Vedic phrases at you, but another one is Brahman is the charioteer. Right. And what that one is meant to mean is that, Hertz has not put you in the driver's seat. If you remember those old commercials, you're in the back seat, you're the passenger. Brahman is driving the car. So the cosmic intelligence, the wholeness or whatever, that is you were talking earlier about free will and the doer. That's the real doer, but we're still in the car. There's still some kind of, ahamkara, some I maker, some self sense that is different for you than for me. I mean, if you have a appendicitis attack all of a sudden, you're going to be experiencing a lot of pain. I'm not, because I'm in a different location with a different individual expression, even though fundamentally we're the same cosmic intelligence, same awareness. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So Well, there's a couple of things there I could go at, but let me go after this one because it relates back to the conversation that you and Susanna were having. Is the sense of being identical to is what we're looking at with identity. That's the sense of self is a sense of being identical to. So I could describe my experience in terms of what you were describing in the scriptures there. Well, something remains of the self.
It's called Lesha Vidya in Vedanta, which means faint remains of ignorance.
Yeah. So, but I wouldn't say that it's a faint. There's something about this, and it's a reason why it's called awakening, right? Awakening out of any sense of identification with any kind of self, any kind of separate self, and it just ends. So, as Susanna was telling you, it's just not there. There's no sense of confusion about that anymore. It's just over. In a sense, it's as much a surprise to you, in quotes, as to anybody. It's like, wow, it's like that. Oh. But there's no sense of, it's such a distinct vacancy. I like that word, vacancy, where I for such a long time, even after getting past all this superficial and even deeper sense of self around the body and the mind, and location, the end of even any subtle sense of being residing in, I would say the only thing that's left is there is an interesting, as awareness, at some point you realize what I am is this: alive being, alive existence, alive presence, aware presence. That's all talking about the same thing. As that, there's a sense of association with, and this isn't the best word, but it's the best one I can come up with this body.
Okay, association. Mind. That's not a bad word.
So I like that because it's fairly neutral. It's it doesn't personalize it in any way because it does not feel personalized, and yet there's it's almost like, it's a little like watching a ship, like a small sailboat. It starts on the beach and then gradually it's drifting out to sea. But for a long time, it's within view and it gets a little special attention. But you can feel it. Just at some point, you can see the progression in that it just becomes less and less important. And that's a good description of the whole process. It's like, what's all this emphasis put on Dan's life and his interests and his opinions? And so you see all that falling away in the process as you're investigating you don't go directly at, well, I don't want to have all these opinions anymore. I want to stop stating opinions. You start disidentifying with it. It's like, that's not even my idea. Why do I give a shit about that? So there's a gradual process like that going on about very specific, elements of the personal experience, but also the whole of the body mind, the whole of the sense of self in general. There's what we're calling waking up or awakening is this increasing lack of a sense of identicalness to this, to the point where it feels much more like an object in awareness. And yet, like I said, there's an interesting association with this particular body mind that's not steady, it's not constant either. So many times it's completely, there's no interest in this at all. It's just there's a bird on a tree. And so it seems to have something to do with attention and maybe the habit of attention. Anyway, go ahead. I think you were going to say something.
Well, yeah. It also seems to me to have to do with the circumstances. Like there might be circumstances in which there is no need for there to be a close association with what the body is doing. Other times, you're driving in heavy traffic, or I don't know, you're about to injure yourself or something rather. The association kind of zooms in like a camera lens. It can kind of zoom in when necessary and zoom out when not necessary.
Right.
And
right. I would say that happens independently, though, of the sense of identification. So I don't think that those two necessarily are the same thing.
Yes. And my experience is that even if I'm having some very intense experience, like I brought this up several times, but this happened to me a few years ago where I tripped over something on the pickleball court and I landed on my face, and my, I was bleeding and everything.
Mm-hmm.
In the instant of that happening, there was just this clear awareness that was untouched by it, and the intensity of the experience threw that into contrast more than just everyday, circumstances.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have had time to think about that if I wanted to. I was busy falling on my face, but
Or try to detach from the pain.
No effort. No, it was just there. That's the way it is. And
what would you attribute that to?
Half a century of meditation and spiritual practice and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Which it's grown incrementally,
Yeah. But I would say that naturally involves self-investigation.
Yeah. Perhaps in a different mode or method or form than what you're doing. But, I've derived tremendous progress and benefit from what I've been doing. And I'm always open to new things. I'm just curious about it all.
So I would say, though, in that moment, there was a disidentification with detachment, not feeling identical to the body and the pain in the body at that moment.
Right. Which had already been there before I fell on my face, but which was more obvious as I was hitting the pavement.
Right. For some reason, the contrast, like you said, the intensity of the experience can accentuate that sense of not identical to.
And for some reason, I get that when I'm running through a busy airport or something too, just the chaos in contrast with the silence,
Right. But at the same time, so I think this is a good segue into exploring, well, what's the problem with identification? Is there was a sense of awareness, that which saw Rick sitting there with his bloody nose and in pain. And all of a sudden there's awareness of that condition, right? So the identification tends to obscure that.
Yeah.
And that's how I would describe, that's one of the nice side effects, or even the point of this, is that all this attention to meing all the time, is it really necessary? Is it helping? Does it make anything clearer? It actually seems to act as a obscuring. And I'm not saying that ultimately that in the cosmic, view of things, that I like the idea that there's nothing wrong with identification, that it's serving some purpose, and that it truly is just as miraculous as anything else occurring. So I'm not saying it's a terrible thing. I don't tear into the ego and say we got to destroy it, or even the sense of self. It's a matter of just, it's time to wake up. It's time to see things more clearly. Let's look and see. Let's look and see. Is this thing that's always at the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Me, the sense of me. Is it really? See, is it the most significant thing? It's in the most significant seat in the house. Is it the most significant thing going on here?
Yeah, there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita which says that someone who claims authorship of action is actually taking something that doesn't belong to him, and he's a thief. Mm-hmm. They calls him a thief for doing that.
Yeah, I like it.
But there are these paradoxical verses, though. I mean, there are a bunch of verses like that where it says, "You're not the doer. Action is done by what they call the gunas of nature. Some forces of nature, and so on." And the wise or the enlightened, have this sense that I do not act at all. But then they'll get to another verse which says, "You have control over action alone, never over its fruits." Don't attach yourself to inaction. Engage in action, and yada yada. So it attributes authorship to action. So it gets us back to the point of paradox. And I still think that both of these things can be simultaneously true without conflicting with each other.
Yeah, it's like how do we reconcile the contradiction or the paradox?
Right.
So some of this, I think, is, and I see this in teaching and working with people. I'll say one thing and then somebody would say, yeah, but you told her to do this. And I'll say, well, that was within the context of what we were talking about in there. And language is a burden, at times, because it's got its limitations. And so if I'm saying, yeah, you can't take any action because there's no you to take it. And then here it's like, you need to get busy and work harder. It's like, well, which is it? Are we talking, is there a me that needs to work harder, or is there no me and no one to take action? And it's like, well, they're both true.
Both true. I'm reminded of Sly and the Family Stone. Different strokes
there you go.
for different strokes for different folks.
They're right.
Sly Stone just died recently.
Oh, he did.
Yeah. Paradox. Nisargadatta Maharaj said that the ability to appreciate paradox and ambiguity is a sign of spiritual maturity.
Right. Yeah. I think, and that's actually, I was thinking about that it's a natural part of the progression of this is you start going, you somehow, I think it's a matter of increasing perspective, almost like literally you're getting height on the issue. And you can say, well, from up here, I can see how these pieces, look in disparity and yet they fit together. So I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah. And speaking of progression, maybe you could take us through a little bit of progression. So how many years ago did this begin to dawn on you? And initially, was there an I got it, I lost it phase that went on for some while, and then eventually it became more abiding? And then third part of the question is, now, month to month, year to year, do you feel that a certain deepening or maturation or refinement or some such thing is still continuing?
Yeah, I knew this was going to happen. You'll ask a complex question, with multiple things, and I'm like, okay, what was the first one?
Okay, I'll go back. So first part, how many years ago did this first happen? And was there an initial phase where it was just a glimpse here and a glimpse there, but most of the time it was not there, and then it got more and more frequent, and and then eventually just seemed to be there all the time?
Yeah. So initially, so there was this initial thing of just, exploring a lot of spirituality and different forms of Christianity, because that's what I was raised with. And then just, coming into Ram Dass and those guys, and then finding self-inquiry and going, there's something about self-inquiry and Ramana Maharshi and those kind of sages that started really resonating, and then being drawn into that. And then spending years, and honestly, this is why I wrote the book eventually and developed this approach, was I couldn't make sense out of it. Ramana Maharshi was the best version of what was coming out of the teachings that were written around what he said. That was the best I could find. And it just didn't really help me a lot in what to do. So a lot of fumbling around with it, just trying to look, not knowing how to look. And then finally getting that, you look like this. This is how you do investigation. Attention goes here. It focuses on this. You stay with direct experience. And then and then down the road, years along the road of working with that, having flashes that would just seem to come, not exactly from my moment to moment, not like I would say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to have an awakening kind of experience. I'm going to have a selfless experience, or that sense of awareness is just pregnant in the moment, just full of awareness. It's almost obliterating any sense of self. Those were happening, and then it would be getting it, losing it, and then being frustrated and going, I got to get back to that, because that is like my reason for living. It's what I want more than anything. I don't know why, but it just seems like the most profound experience of truth that I could think of. And then just working and struggling and taking wrong turns and then focusing and refining the self-inquiry down, and not even knowing if that's working, wanting to quit and just say, this is all, maybe I'm making this all up. But I could never forget, I think I mentioned in the book, there was one experience happened probably in my mid-20s of just real clear, and it wasn't from self-inquiry exactly. I was reading Alan Watts, and I was kind of reading it in parallel to some Buddhist texts around no self, nada, and going, what are these guys talking about? I mean, they really seem to be talking about that there isn't an actual self. And then just having this flash all of a sudden, just doing this simple thing of just looking in, going, am I actually in here? Without, and not thinking my way to it, but just looking where, looking right where I should have been the most, and realizing, number one, I'd never looked there, never looked. I just assumed I was there. And when I looked, I didn't find anything. I didn't confirm my presence, my existence. And then the profundity of that just had that kind of, it was like an awakening experience. And then, of course, that seemed to fade, and then it was hard to even remember what it was like, and then just trying to get back there. So, yeah, I think, did I answer your question?
No, you were part there with it. Yeah, most of it, or at least the first part. I mean, the thing you were looking for was the thing that was looking. So no wonder you didn't find anything.
Yeah. But in that
like
moment,
a dog chasing its tail or something.
I think in that moment that the snake eats its tail.
Right.
It's just like, this is it. Even say, that statement, this is it. This is it. I mean, there's so many levels to the truth of that.
Yeah.
But what I did notice was it didn't need a me. And the sense of me at that moment, that flash, that one flash at that moment, that clear moment, was enough to just annihilate all kinds of thinking around my necessity, the necessity of my sense of self. I just knew it's not necessary to this. That whatever we are is something far beyond that. And so it was almost just the most natural thing to from there to have a certain level of just rejection of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what effect did all this have on your life? I mean, it's not, you're still alive, so it's still having an effect, but at least in those initial stages, did you find that it was enhancing your relationships, your skill, your abilities at work or whatever? Or was it distracting you from them? Was it kind of deadening your emotions or enriching them? And what kind of impact did it have?
Yeah. So more psychologically, personality, so I had more than a fair share of condition, negative conditioning, dysfunctionality, anxiety, things like that. So, interestingly, so I was interested in psychology. So I was working on trying to work my way through that, doing some therapy. But at the same time, I was working on self-investigation. What I found was that this self-investigation was just like really cleaning through stuff without even having to pick through it. And whereas the psychological work, I think gradually there was a shifting away from that. But in general, I would say very much a process of, although relationships ended, they ended messily sometimes. No jobs, there was issue with career issues and going to school and failing at things. There's plenty of that. But in general, I'd say very positive, very things getting cleaner and lighter and clearer. And yet even now, so I'm married and I've been in a relationship for 20 years.
You have a daughter.
And I have a daughter. And those relationships go through cycles of challenge. So every year we have sort of a State of the Union address, where we address where are we in the relationship, what's going on with this. And this sounds a little cold, and it's not meant that way, because it's very intimate. But it's like, does this need to continue? Does it feel right for this to continue? So there's never a resting. And I would say that's a big part of sort of what we call post-awakening, right? Is that, hey, things go on, but there's an awareness of those, and in a sense, in a very impersonal way, and yet significant attention is given to it. And on this level of considering, does this seem to serve everyone? Does it serve a sort of a higher purpose of things? Is it growing? Is there more clarity, or is it drifting into what a lot of relationships do, which is distance and apathy and things like that? So I'm covering a lot of ground here.
So in other words, you don't let your relationship just sort of stagnate or fall into a habitual rut. There's this kind of a periodic reassessment and with a sort of a somewhat detached perspective and an evaluation to, maybe course correct a little bit or decide if it should continue going in the direction it is. I think that's what you said.
Relatively speaking, it's like that. It's like I'm attending to, I'm giving a mature attention to, I'm being mature about it and being, honest about it. What's the state of the relationship? In the bigger sense, that's relatively speaking. In the bigger sense, I let Dan take care of it. I mean, honestly, there's a sense of, look, he's pretty good about that. He'll take care of it. He does the checking in. He deals with the grocery clerks and does all that stuff. So there's a real ease of. I actually had a friend who was a psychologist say, this sounds like a dissociative state that you're talking about. And I just said, well, maybe in a sense it does. But what's it like to be associated? What's the other end of that? So it's it's detached and not, in the sense of not being enmeshed in the issues, in the struggle, and a lot of thought about it. Like these things I'm talking about with the relationship, there's not a lot of thought going on with it. It seems very natural and very intuitive. Hey, what's the state of this relationship? How's it going? Are we happy? Is there increasing and sometimes that ends up, and often you talking to my wife about this, it's a challenge because I'll say, I feel like it seems like it could be more effective. What do you think? Do you want to take part in that? But it's always very open-ended. Like if you don't want to be a part of that anymore, that's understandable. Speaking with her,
Right.
But I can't do anything else. I'm not really capable of just going, well, let's just coast and we'll watch TV together in the evenings and, whatever. Just we'll keep each other company until we're too old.
Then it's like, who are you after? What, have I met you? Well, it's funny that your name is Dan because I have this old friend named Dan, and we used to be part of this satsang group that met every week. And he used to talk about Big Dan and Little Dan. There was Little Dan, and then there was Big Dan, and Big, and it kind of what you're talking about was just that. And I would distinguish between what you just described and disassociation as a psychologically undesirable trait or state, as being that type of disassociation in psychology is a fragmentation of the individuality.
Right.
There's no
trauma and trying to get away from.
Right. And there's no universal self or pure consciousness in the picture. It's just the individual personality is fragmented. Whereas what you're talking about is the distinction between kind of big self and little self, capital S and small s self, pure awareness and individuality. Am I right?
Yeah. And it's all about being identical to or not. So seeing not being identical to the character, right?
Right.
And or any I sense, which is not really something that arises anymore. But if there was one, that would be seen in its objective nature as also not self, not what I am, not what I am. So there's that sense of detachment, and yet it's not unintimate, right? It's actually very intimate, but there's no sense of there's no way to put yourself in there at a certain point. And no need to. There's no need to insert. It would feel like a completely pretentious action to insert myself, whatever I am, which is part of the mystery, right? You can call it awareness, you can call it consciousness, But to insert that into, it's everywhere. It's all around. The body
Yeah,
is
it's
arising
everywhere.
in it as
Right.
it. So it's like the way you were talking about Brahman.
Right.
So, but it would feel completely false to then say, and somehow Brahman is more important inside the body, inside a character than outside.
No, I mean,
No, yeah, you would never.
it's, I mean, if Brahman is the totality, then it's all pervading everything. It
It isn't more Brahman if it's poured into a
right.
body mind.
It's just as much Brahman in a pile of dog poop as it is in a body mind.
Right.
I mean, it's all pervading.
But you could say that the conventional view of things is that Brahman inside the body is much more, that me as Brahman in the body, this sense of me, is more important than all other Brahman. I mean, that's a way of looking at how the sense of individual importance manifests in we'll say the unawake.
Mm. Yeah, well, in the unawake, they're not thinking in terms of Brahman. They're just thinking in terms of their individuality.
No, I'm just using that term because we can talk about that there's something that's kind of it's the fundamental ground of being.
One way I look at it is that the universe, who was it? Brian Swim, whom I interviewed a few years ago, he said, you take hydrogen and leave it alone for 13.8 billion years, and you end up with rose bushes, giraffes, and Mozart, you know? Mm-hmm. So there's something marvelous about the self-organizing nature of the universe. And some would say it's not just hydrogen somehow, organizing itself into all these things. There's all underlying intelligence that, contains within it laws of nature that orchestrate the evolution of the universe into greater and greater complexity. And the more complex the form, the more fully the form can embody that intelligence which gave rise to it. So a human being can embody it much more fully than an ant, and so on. And so there is something, in a way,
as far as we know.
Yeah. So there is something kind of special about a more complex form. It's taken a lot more evolution for it to have come into being.
And yet I've met a few dogs that are a lot more embodying of that than people.
Yes, I could agree.
So it's interesting that just having a higher brain functions and so on doesn't guarantee that there's the same level of recognition of the,
Yeah, there's a bumper sticker that's something like may I be the kind of human that my dog thinks I am, something like that.
Oh, there you go.
And there was a Zen koan, does a dog have Buddha nature?
Yeah.
And I would say yes, but does the dog know its Buddha nature, or is it able to sort of fully realize and express its Buddha nature as fully as some higher life form? Maybe that's just a tangent.
But it kind of goes off in an interesting, touches on something interesting. What happens to the body mind with awakening? Mm-hmm. And even approximating these levels of clarity? Well, there's clearly an influential effect. So we see that of the body mind, right. The character. So you see somebody, you can pick any of the great sages and just say, as just from a human being level, you could tell there was something going on there. There was a certain equanimity, a certain peacefulness, a certain clarity, wisdom, things like that.
Bliss, happiness.
Happiness, yes. So there's an influence there.
Yeah.
But then what happens is a student comes along and says, oh, that's the teacher. It's all contained within the character, right? So they start treating the character like it's special. And most teachers worth their salt will come along and go, you're missing the point, It's not, it's just, but you don't hear much talk about this. The influence of awakening awakening transcends the body mind. And yet there is an influence. The body mind begins to reflect that condition.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's an important one. And also, I'm reading a biography of Gopi Krishna now, whom I don't know if you've heard of him, but he
Heard of him.
was, all I had known
Is
about
he the
him
one that
was,
had all the gals around him?
no. That was Krishna himself and the gopis.
Oh, okay.
This is an Indian guy who lived in the 20th century, whose name happened to be Gopi Krishna.
Yeah.
But he had this. He was a brilliant man. He had this profound Kundalini awakening, and he went through hell and heaven. I mean, and the hell part was that his body was so profoundly impacted by the awakening that was taking place that he had to be extremely careful of what he ate and what he did and how he acted. I mean, the slightest deviation from honesty and truth and all really would impact him.
Right.
And the heaven part, the interesting part was, well, that was a good part too, although difficult, but he also began to like compose verse first in his native language, which I think was Urdu, and then in German and languages he had never spoken, and he found himself composing these verses. So
And never studied, right?
I never had studied or learned or knew how to speak or anything else. This stuff started coming out of him. So just the impact of that on the body mind, it reminded me of that. Just what you're saying there. Now, there's an interesting thing. Go ahead, and you might want to respond to that before I say anything more.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So what you've described about your experience so far reminds me of a whole kind of topography of higher states of consciousness that I once studied deeply. And one stage of it is where, as you're describing, there's this detachment between self and non-self, or self meaning, the pure awareness, and non-self meaning everything else, including the world. And then over time, the gulf between them begins to narrow. And it does so because of the impact of that realization on the body mind, in which it refines it, it purifies it. And as it does so, the heart begins to grow more, appreciation of everything begins to grow more.
Heart meaning not the physical heart, but
no, the emotional
ability to love.
To love, yes. Yeah. And also even the senses begin to get more refined and to appreciate the creation and its finer values. And so the kind of gulf between the pure awareness and the world begins to narrow, and the appreciation begins to grow, and it blossoms into something which in this topography was called God consciousness. And then that takes a further step in which the self, which we realize ourselves to be in that initial stage of realization, is seen to be the essential constituent of the creation itself. And so there's really no distinction between that and this. And, that would be unity. There's a sort of a unification of an initial gulf or detachment that took place.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, my take on that is that, and this touches on something that I think happens with awakening in parallel to that, a sensitivity, I would say, to, and I'm just going to do my best to kind of describe it, but it's almost like there are other dimensions, literally in the sense of more than 3 or 4 dimensions. There's other dimensions of existence that you begin to access as a natural part of this process. And so, like that sense of, on one level, I'd say, and I've talked to people about this, it's like, I love nature. That's why I live where I live. We live in the mountains. We have 20 acres. You can walk around on it, and it's beautiful. It's like having your own park. And it just, aside from the fact that it was kind of mystical the way it all came about, but there's such a sense of connection to life in the forest. But to say I feel connected to the tree is to miss the other dimensions where there's much more activity going on with that. So it started as a felt sense of union with that. There's something about the tree and I'm looking at a tree out the window right now. Something about that tree that's completely in common with this, the sense of being, that's one. But it's not the tree. It's not the physical form of the tree.
No.
But I sense the reality of that.
It's like the essential nature of the tree, you could say.
So the tree and the body mind, this is one way that the body mind becomes very transparent to those other dimensions of existence. And that I would say after what I'm calling awakening, which is just the end of this sense of identification, it just goes on. I mean, this process continues on. It does not end there. So it's a little misnomer to call it awakening as if it's an end, or enlightenment for that matter, because it just continues enlightening.
Yeah.
So, but I just kind of wanted to convey that and see if that made sense, this sense of this other dimension to experience, and like the sense that the physical is very transparent to that, just increasingly so.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And I love what you're saying. I totally agree. The subtitle of this show used to be Interviews with Spiritually Awakened People. And then
I was wondering why you changed it to.
Yeah, we changed it to Spiritually Awakening because awakened is too static, you know. And then we also changed it to Conversations instead of Interviews because I talk too much. But you know, Saint Teresa of Avila said, "It appears that God Himself is on the journey." So my sense of things is that there's no end to for anybody, and who knows where it all leads. But
and yet there are discrete transitions.
Yes,
like the transition. I think the one that seems one of the most significant of, at least as far as so far, is away from that sense of identification, not being identical to any longer. It's just such an opening and clarifying, and it's completely in line with this thing we're talking about in terms of the sensing and experiencing and exploring and curiously involved with other dimensions of existence, the deeper dimensions of things. So that seems to be a big turning point, getting this sense of self. It's like, look, let's just get it out of the way so we have a better view. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It's just about wildest attention to that. There's so much more.
Yeah. I think when that reminds me of an important point. I think that Ramana and many other skillful teachers were good at tailoring their teaching to the person they were addressing. And it would, again, be different strokes for different folks. There's a saying in India that when the mango tree is ripe, the branches bend down so people can easily pick the mangoes. So the teacher kind of meets the student at the level which is appropriate for that student. And that would be different things for different students. And sometimes in this day and age, and it used to be that certain teachings were kind of secret and they wouldn't just be broadcast to everybody, that you'd have to go through certain stages of readiness before
rituals and
certain maturation before you receive a certain teaching. These days, everything is out on the internet. And I think that it's a bit of a problem because some people for whom this no self teaching might not yet be at a stage where that is what they need to hear, try to apply that, and they can get into trouble. There's this lady I interviewed named Jessica Nathanson who kind of specializes in helping rehabilitate people who've gone heavy into Neo-Advaita, and they've become nihilistic.
Destabilized, right?
Yeah, they've gotten destabilized. They've lost interest in their families. They can't hold down a job. They're having suicidal ideation, and in some cases, actual suicide.
Right.
So I think it's very important to ready the ground before administering certain teachings to certain people.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't work with that many people, for one thing. I've come up through the Advaita, community with Adyashanti and a lot of the popular teachers where they have large rooms with lots of people and everything. Yeah. I don't have any interest in that at all. I think it's number one, it's too hard to really see where people are at. I like to work very personally, keep it small. And to your point, are you I've turned away more people, and I do this gently, but it sounds a little harsh, but I've told more people that's like, look, this is not for you. I would just say, look, I don't think you want this. And we'll talk about it. I mean, I'll talk to anybody, but basically you really need to be ready to dive into this. And you got to have in one way, very psychologically stable. Any of that stuff is going to get stirred up, and it'll preoccupy your attention anyway. And so every once in a while, when I first started out, I've been doing this for like 12 years now. So after watching this process with a few hundred people, many of the people that I worked with at the beginning, I catch the signs of that early on and just say, I'll tell it, go check that out. You should go check that. You want to, I don't answer questions about should I go to graduate school and things like that. It's like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I can point at the sense of self and help you investigate that. But I think that the risks there and I've had a couple of people that were actually they weren't students at the time. They were just friends who were really curious. One was, well, I thought she was pretty stable, seemed pretty solid and comfortable and confident, and she had a master's in social work or whatever. And she's like, so what is this self-inquiry thing you're doing? Tell me about it. And I said, well, let's do it together. And we started to explore it. And she got so uncomfortable with that vacancy that's just touching on it. She said, this is just too weird. I never want to do that again. So, I just think it's exactly what you're saying. You got to be ready for it. You got to be right. And there's indicators of that. And sometimes you just have to experiment with it a little and go, yeah, it doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel right. Because this was a very fairly comfortable process all the way through. Certainly struggles at times, but not terrifying or dark night of the soul. There was nothing like that. So at least I know that can be the progression. And it still allows for the fact that it could get it could be a dark night of the soul kind of thing. But there's usually indicators of, like, I'll get a sense of, should this person go on or not? Do they need to back off and do a little psychotherapy and get stabilized again? Or are they in a place where this is ready to fall off? And so I think reading that is kind of the responsibility part of it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, definitely. There's problems with a big mass approach, where everybody's taught the same thing. And
I would never do this with more than 15 people.
Yeah.
And that's about what I'm handling right now. So I think as soon as it's also shortchanging people, because you can't really be there. It's a very intimate, connection that you're making with somebody. In some ways, much more intimate than making friends with people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're letting you into some very vulnerable places. And so you got to be present in a sense for that.
So what, you say you've dealt with 100, 200 students over the years?
Probably, yeah, few hundred. Yeah.
Yeah. And in general, if you could generalize, what's been your experience with them all? Has there, obviously you have to generalize, but
the whole range.
Has it tended to enhance their lives in addition to having, like, you see, one of my concerns coming into this was the notion that this could actually make well, you said in the beginning that this is not an intellectual path to realization where you're sort of denying the reality of the relative world and hammering that thought into your head. That approach can be appropriate for recluses or people who are inclined to be recluses. But if a householder does that, it can make them disinterested in the life that they're living and the responsibilities that they have. So I think
some of that is going to happen anyway. I mean, there will be changes. It happened in my case. I had a career and it was the pinnacle of my profession. And working at Apple and doing this work that I had studied and was interested in. And then it was right around this period, just around post-awakening. And then I just lost interest in it. And I had to deal with, I had to talk to my wife and tell her, look, I'm thinking of going in a whole different direction here. So the income level is going to go way down. And just seeing if she's on board with that. But I didn't really have a choice. I mean, and it was very comfortable. What's that?
How old were you at that time?
Let's see. Yeah, that was about 10 years ago, 58.
You were 58. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but then, it felt very natural for those things to drop away. And I think that's one of the indicators of this. It's fine if life changes are taking place, but they don't happen fast. It's not immediate. It's not overnight. So that's a bit of a red flag. If people come back from retreats all the time, and this is their experience, and they're like, I'm breaking up with my husband or my wife. I'm going to change my profession. It's like, whoa, just slow down a little bit, just give it a couple of days or something before you start changing everything. But they will change, and it's radical. I mean, we moved out. I lived in California and around cities and working in big corporations, and now my life now is completely different from that. And all that felt very natural and in a natural progression, but it didn't happen rapidly. And
yeah, I mean, I would probably have wanted to make the same move you did, getting out of the Bay Area or wherever you were and into the woods of North Carolina sounds great. Now, on the other hand, somebody else, might want to stay there and could still progress spiritually under a high pressure situation. In India, they traditionally had these different stages of life. There's the brahmachari stage, you're a student, and then there's the householder married stage, and then up to mid 50s or something, and then you shift into a bit more reclusive stage, just like you've done, and then possibly at the very end you go into a sannyasi stage. So it's natural.
Yeah, I can see that as certainly. While I think this transcends any kind of physical chronological stage thing, it does seem to reflect that at certain stages. But I would say it was the depth and clarity and impact of the awakening process that initiated the change, not that it was necessarily a time in life.
Right.
Yeah. But also, I wanted to add to that just that I think it can be, I think it feels like a loving existence. So it can be gentle. It doesn't have to be. I think if it's a lot of trauma is being triggered, that's an indicator of something. It's like, ease up, eat some ice cream, watch a movie,
Yeah, chill.
Coast for a while, you'll still be attending, pay attention. You'll keep paying attention and investigating. You'll be curious. Your curiosity is not going anywhere. But it's okay to back off. I mean, I certainly did it many times. And like I said, even going, I quit. It's not, I don't think this is ever going to work. I mean, who am I to think that I can, achieve what these great saints have achieved and all that kind of stuff. And so just wanting to dump it and then backing away and just playing the game for a while and then going, I got to get back to it. I got to keep going.
Yeah. No, it's an important point you're making. And the people you talked about who would go on a retreat and then come home and, throw away all their possessions and put on a loincloth or something. It's just like, hey, dude, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You can apply yourself with a great deal of ardor and diligence, but at the same time, you're not gonna, become the Buddha this weekend or something. It takes time to mature into this, really.
Right. And I think that's part of what comes with the process is there is a certain degree of wisdom and like, pace yourself, take it easy. There's nothing terrible about any of this. It's not an awful thing that I wasn't running away from something, right? I wasn't running away from corporate work or anything. It was actually good to be in the midst of that craziness and the demanding nature of it. It was good. It fueled, this inner process. So
Yeah, that can be what a person needs at a certain point, the intense activity to sort of stabilize and integrate. In fact, I knew this guy who was over in Switzerland on the international staff of the TM movement, and he was really spacey. He was just kind of like too much meditation and everything. Maharishi said, "Go back home and get a job loading trucks."
Yeah. Yeah. Did he do it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
noticed
I
that a
remember,
bunch. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just remembering a teacher, I didn't get a lot from him, but Doff Rejon, he used to be called Doff Rejon.
Oh, brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He had a lot of talk about a wacky spiritual guy. But one of the things when I was studying some of his teachings at the time and living up in Oregon, and I was working part-time jobs, I was like, I don't want to be a part of the corporate world. And then and it wasn't just that he had said this or wrote it. It was that it just clicked. And he said, you got to be willing to go out and get a job full time and just make money, just make some money. And I thought, I didn't even think about that. I mean, I've been just so resistant to it. I didn't think it might be a part of the spiritual process. And so
Sure.
and it began a whole opening into, facing fears and challenges that I wouldn't have gotten if I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And then ultimately there was an abandonment of all that, but at the right time. It felt right to leave all that behind. And that made it so much easier. It was just such an easy transition. All these people that retire out of corporate world and they just go nuts. They're like, I don't know what to do with myself.
Right.
And I know exactly what to do with myself. I'm going to paint. I'm going to sculpt. I'm going to move to a really cool place because I don't have to be here to work anymore.
Yeah, which you could do because you had some money because you'd been working, So
right, exactly.
Right. I just noticed that a bunch of questions came in, so this might be a little bit disjointed as we jump around, but let's see what we got here. There was another question from that guy in Scotland. Whose name was David Hill.
Not Scott.
No, not Scott. Dave from Scotland. Can you know physical pain without being in physical pain? I think I know what he means.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of what we've been talking about, is this sense of it's a healthy, natural detachment from not the pain. See, we're not being the pain. We're being the one who, I would say, we're the one who's experiencing the pain. So seeing through the sense of the pained one releases. It doesn't mean the pain goes away, though. It still registers. So I'd say that's what we're really talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I sometimes wonder about that. Like, I could handle my pickleball accident, no big deal. But if I were crucified or something horrible like that, I mean, could I, would I just totally lose it and be overshadowed, or I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. So about during the COVID thing, so my body really got hit hard with that, and I ended up in the hospital. And it affected my breathing. It was hard to breathe. I needed oxygen, and there was a point where there you are, looking at the body, sitting in the bed in the hospital. Doctors are coming in. Everybody's looking real serious. And they're saying we might have to intubate. Yeah, because it was getting really hard to breathe. But the whole time, there was just a sense of, it sounds too good to be true, but it was, and I was just, in a sense, surprised as the next person. Was like, oh, maybe this is it. Death, So there was a sense of the discomfort. I mean, not being able to breathe is pretty uncomfortable. Sure. It's not crucified, but it's up there in the top 10, feeling like you just can't get a breath. You're drowning, and just feeling the body getting really weak. I mean, losing like 30 pounds within a week, and just, really, and just a sense that this is the end. This could be the end of the body. Maybe it wants to go. And being almost joyful about that. So, but certainly detached, a sense of, I could not get into that pain. So just to address David's point, there was no getting into it. There was no becoming identical to the one suffering it. So there was a sense of freedom around it, that freedom it's always there. So at least that was a taste of that,
Sure.
discomfort, real high discomfort level, and to potentially being death. And then there was no remorsefulness. It was kind of like, what's next? It was like that.
Yeah. Woody Allen said, I don't mind dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens.
Happens, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
It's like
here's
people
another
talking
one.
about falling. They go, I don't mind falling. It's the abrupt stop at the
Yeah,
end.
it's the landing.
Yeah, right.
Here's a question from somebody named Marie in the US. Dan, do you still engage in formal practice or contemplation of some sort, or did any need or impulse to do this drop away with the final non-dual insight? What do you recommend to your students in this regard?
In regards to at some point,
Formal practice of some sort.
yeah. Well, so there's one point around, do you keep doing a lot of practices? And so when I talk to students, I say, I don't encourage you to spread yourself around so much. Pick something that you really feel is meaningful, significant, that has a big impact, that seems like your path. And I would say, as soon as you can, commit to that. Don't dig a bunch of shallow holes. So she's not asking this, I don't think exactly, but so I would say at some point, so whatever it was 12 years ago or something like that, after awakening, that was the age of self-inquiry. There was a little bit of looking around. So looking continued. There was still like, is it here? Is there anything here? Nope. Okay. Keep looking, because the looking had gone on so long. But then eventually, it's just the end of self-inquiry practice. There's no sense of self to inquire into anymore. There's just such a sense of clarity, and in the end of that nothing to do. But the new practice, so the sense of awareness or presence awareing around, but that continued. It wasn't channeled towards self-investigation. It was kind of like explore. What's the nature of, so sometimes I'll say this to a student, I'll go, so you're starting to come into, you have a sense of awareness. Explore this awareness. There's a sense of self that's there. Explore that. The sense of self disappears and the awareness becomes very pronounced. Check out this pronounced sense of awareness experience. So you're already prepping for that in what they're doing. And then as you go through these stages, and like I said, awakening out away from the end of the sense of identification, the sense of self, is a major turning point. But yet the process continues. So it's almost like, and this sounds a little trite, but life becomes a meditation. There's just a natural reflection. I would say a contemplation. It's more just an ongoing contemplative process, just reflecting on, wow, what's the nature of this? What's the nature of these other dimensions of experience? What's that? It's all about the direct experience. So in that sense, you could call that a practice, but it's not. It, like I said, it becomes more. And I think that's a good way to look at this is, let self-inquiry, self-investigation, deep self-investigation is your calling, then dive in and let it show you, in a sense, let what you see show you the way to go. Let it become the way you live your life, not something that you do at special times during the day. I don't agree with that idea that you just isolate certain portions of your life and say, I do really intense meditation here, but then I don't. The rest of the time, I'm just, living my life and doing whatever. I'd say, let it infiltrate the rest of your life. Just, it's what you do.
Yeah. Also, I meditate, a couple hours a day if you add it all up.
Yeah.
And it has its place. I don't meditate all day. I don't eat all day. I don't take a shower all day. I don't sleep all day. The day is apportioned into these various things. And like you said earlier, this awakening has an influence on the neurophysiology, on the mind-body system. So certainly meditation itself has a neurophysiological effect. But that kind of carries over into the day. And I think that the whole process is a continual refinement of the neurophysiology, an evolution of it over time.
I would guess too, on a deep level, that your meditation never ends.
True.
But on some level, you're always, whatever it is, that it's always there.
Yes.
That it's infiltrated the rest. So you can't turn it off completely. You can't say, now I'm not doing that and I'm doing this other thing.
No.
Yeah. So I think,
you could say that what you initially started meditating to reach ends up being there all the time, but it's still nice to meditate because it gives the mind body a chance to just settle down into a state of deep quiescence and rest.
Right.
I'm told the Buddha meditated all his life, So, but that's an individual consideration, not something I'm saying everybody should do.
Right.
It's just kind of became my life's habit, and it's saved me from being a high school dropout drug fiend to living a constructive life.
Well, and I think though those, like I would say, sometimes at night, just to talk in regular terms, at night the mind's very active, and so vipassana comes back.
Yeah.
Watching the breath. It's a very natural, it went on for years, hadn't, no formal practice for years, and yet it's right there. And it's a very, and I think this is what I read about the Buddha around that. It's like to go into certain meditative conditions at certain times. It's just, it's enjoyable to do, and it's very
good. It's good for you. It's like
has a really great effect.
Yeah, like getting a good night's sleep. It's just a different state that has a different effect, but comparable.
So in that sense, I think
what you were saying a few minutes ago, I wanted to just come back to. You were saying how somehow your orientation has shifted to exploring what this is, the subtler levels of
the dimensions
and stuff. And it reminds me of that topology I outlined earlier, which is that, the teacher who I learned that from used to say that, until you know who or what you are, you can't really know what all this is. I mean, who knows it? There has to be that foundation for any significant appreciation of the world to develop. But once that foundation is established, then you can really begin to enhance your appreciation of creation, including all of its subtle values, subtle realms, subtle dimensions. And it sounds like that's kind of what's happening to you.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there's a big overlap, though, in that. Mm-hmm. So even when there's, a lot of struggle that seems to be going on, or a sense of identity that still persists, you're getting flashes of things. You're getting flashes of, like I can remember, 15, 18 years ago, sitting and just doing formal self-inquiry, and then later, after the fact, it just sort of came to me that this thing that feels much more fleshed out now, a sense of dimension around. At the time, I thought, am I imagining that I'm psychic and I'm doing, what is it they did with the government did those projects with projecting the
remote viewing.
Remote viewing, yeah. So I thought
MK Ultra or something like that.
Right. So I said, oh, is this kind of a remote viewing thing? It's like I can see the back of the leaves, the side that's not facing me in the house. And that was the beginning, though, of feeling this other dimension of things. And it's the same with people. Like, without realizing it, there was, for quite a while, people would say, wow, you're pretty perceptive. They'd say something like that to describe it. But it was just like I was picking up on things without making it sound too new agey woo-woo stuff. But it's kind of like at some point you just have to go, there's something to this.
Yeah.
There's a sense here, and why can't I'm just going to open, let it be, even though the mind is saying, oh, that's bullshit, or you're just imagining things. But and I think that's part of what develops with this, is a sense of openness to this other dimension of life. And I would say now it's hard to imagine life without this constant sense of that. It just gives such a depth to remember that movie Contact?
Oh, I love that. Jodie Foster, right?
Yeah. So you remember when they're looking at they're working with they get that first they get the audio signal,
Mm-hmm.
and then they record it, and they go, oh, there's more here, and then they go, oh yeah, there's a video, depth that's attached to it. So then they look at that, and it's another dimension. It's a great dimensional model for this. So then you see that audio level, and then or the video level, right? And it's on the same signal, but it's piggybacking on it. And then they continue to study it, and then they find a engineering, thing that's built into the pixels of the video image, right? And then they can't figure out how to put the pages together. You remember that?
I don't remember. It's like 30 years since I saw that movie, but
I loved it because of this metaphor, and then finally they get some really smart guys on it, and they realize they have to find a primer. How do we read the language that's on this engineering thing? And then they have all these images, and they've tried all these configurations, and they can't figure out how they fit together. And then somebody says, they're in 3 dimensions. So they bend it, and they put it in a 3-dimensional matrix, and then they go, there it is. At every corner is the primer, or the thing that tells you how to interpret the language. And so that's kind of the way this is. Life is like that. I mean, this is existence. It has these dimensions. And gradually, I think the awakening process, most of it is about discovering that dimension of existence, these other dimensions. It's not this getting beyond the sense of self is it's a big step, but it's just the beginning. So
I love that. Yeah, I love what you're saying. In fact, if I had to define the term enlightenment, which I don't like to use that term, but if I had to define it, it would be the sort of development of the capacity to incorporate within your experience the full range of life's dimensions, from the most manifest to the unmanifest. And there's a great range in between those two extremes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
But you only know that. The funny thing is, you cannot get your brain around that. Like, what would that be like? You can experience it directly. I mean, that's what it's all about. And when you experience it directly, I like to talk about this because I don't have a better way of referring to it, but we start to rely on intuitive knowing instead of intellect. And you realize that gives you, that's the right tool. That gives you this dimension of experience. And it's almost like you perceive, feel the truth of something.
Yeah.
And then you just become, I would say, with awakening, you just become very comfortable with that dimension always being present and accessing it, like I said, through this, it's almost like you develop a new sense, these new senses, sensory apparatus.
Very true. You're right up my alley. Have you heard of the Telepathy Tapes podcast? It's this really cool podcast, which actually at one point was the most popular podcast in the world, surpassing Joe Rogan. And
really?
Yeah. In fact, he had her on his show, the lady who put this thing together. But and I've had the scientist who was involved in it on my show a couple of times, Diane Hennessy Powell. But what it's about is these autistic kids who are nonverbal. They can't really speak. They have to use a letterboard or an iPad or something to communicate. Yeah. But they are extraordinarily telepathic. Like, they can sit.
I think I heard about that.
Yeah, they can sit with their mother, and let's say their mother has a shuffled deck of cards, and they can't see what she's looking at, and they'll get like 98% accuracy, telling you what card she's looking at as she goes through them.
Right.
And in addition to that, these kids
they can't really carry on a conversation.
No, they can't really speak, most of them. So they're open to this subtle dimension and these certain subtle capabilities, even though they're kind of not able to function in the ordinary gross dimension so well. But in addition to this, they have this thing called the Hill, where they meet at night, or and they from all over the world, and they meet with each other and talk with each other and communicate and share ideas and stuff.
Is
And
this on a computer, or this
no,
is
it's like kind of some
in
kind
this
of a
other
Akashic
dimensional?
internet or
Oh,
something,
okay. Okay.
where they're just tuning
Right.
in to on
Yeah.
some collective field. And it's a fascinating podcast, which is why it became so popular, and it's extremely well produced. But these kids feel like,
Yeah.
there is this sort of spiritual unfolding taking place in the world, and they're playing a part in helping to catalyze it
Wow.
or
Yeah, that's
facilitate
interesting.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you mind sending me do you have a link or something you can send me
Yeah,
later?
I will send it to you. And anybody listening, if you just search for the telepathy tapes, it'll come right up.
I
But
love that idea that they actually can go to this dimensional space where they meet,
yeah.
and somehow they're able to communicate that back.
Yeah, and it's not just their say so. I mean, they'll tell their mother, I experienced this on the hill, and she'll check with the mother of some kid in New Zealand or something. Yeah, my son said the same thing to me.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty neat. Okay, let's get back to some more of these questions people have sent in. This one is from, another Scot, Kenny Hogan in Scotland. I spent a few days with family, and my mind was fully occupied with thoughts relating to the ongoing activities. When I returned home, I really had to ground my awareness and return to my realized self. Would you say this is the correct way to go about life from day to day, where I allow myself to be pulled out of my effortless state of mind to ensure I maintain a stable family life?
Well, yeah, there's a couple things there. So, do you have to do that to maintain? Do you have to get pulled into things to maintain a good family life? I would say no. I would say no. There's an alternative to that. And I think that, like, I would say that as this progresses, at least my experience with it was, I became much more functional with family. You could do it with your eyes closed, kind of thing, rather than feeling so drawn into the drama and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what he means by realized self. Like, I come back and I go to my realized self. So
Well, he's
a
not
lot
here
of
to
times
ask,
I'll ask
but
people.
my sense of his question is, how there's sort of a tenderness or delicacy to realization initially, where you kind of lose it if you get into an excited situation, but eventually you maintain it even in excited situations or
Right.
stimulating situations, and it gets more stabilized, it gets more integrated, and eventually I think, for most people, you kind of lose interest in getting into, you don't go to discos at 2 a.m. and stuff. You just don't need that kind of stimulation. That's not where
Right.
you get your yayas.
Right. Yeah. Well, it becomes really obvious that a lot of temporal, a lot of sensory distraction and overload is not all that pleasant. So I think now, and I would say it's a little bit of a side point from what this gentleman's talking about, but I noticed that a lot of that falls away. It's like, yeah, parties, I don't care. I don't care. After going to a couple parties and just, wanting the conversation to move toward something of substance and not seeing it happen and feeling like, what is all this talk about? It's all me stuff, it just became uninteresting to be part of that. So a lot of that kind of falls away anyway. I think also affects family. But again, I would want to know, well, if I was going to talk to this gentleman, I'd say, and he can send me an email if he wants. What is going back to the realized self? What's going on there? What are you doing when you come back? Because ultimately, whatever your practice is, what we were talking about earlier, is like, let it infiltrate the rest of your life. You're sitting there talking to your mother and she's triggering all this stuff, for example. Sit there and look in and go, who's feeling tension? Who's feeling that? I am. What is that? Is that me? Am I really there? What's going? I mean, that's that investigate. And then maybe having a little bit of a breakthrough, like all of a sudden there's mom jabbering on and there's a sense of detachment and going, oh, okay. Now this is interesting. So I think that bringing that in there, and ultimately the realized self, it's not like you get in touch with the realized self and then it's gone. And we really have to eventually see through this coming and going of being, of true, or whatever we call it, the realized self. So it's never gone. It's always here. It's accessible everywhere. Let's check that out. Let's find out.
Reminds me of something Ram Dass said. If you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that week will tell you, I'm enlightened,
Yeah.
Hey, it doesn't matter anymore. But yeah, I think family turns out that's one of those big trigger areas. And most people say, well, I can do my practice, but when I go there, and I did this at work too for a while, there was a sense of I was managing a department. I had to have meetings. I had to give talks. I had to do presentations. And I remember at Apple in the middle of a training exercise for a bunch of managers, and then just going, who's standing up here talking, really looking in. And then just like I was another person, I was just floating awareness in the room. And just seeing, and this is very impacting. There's Dan waving his arms and pointing at the board and going on. And I have nothing to do with it. It's just running on its own. So that sense of experiencing that sense of space was just very profound. It never left. But it definitely muted down, but it was part of this cumulative impact of having flashes of insight. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Cumulative, that's a good word. It tends to be cumulative for most people, and and eventually accumulates to the point where it seldom, if ever, seems to go away.
Right.
But it takes time and integration. Pardon?
I think that's easy to miss, that every time you expose yourself, that's why I say, sometimes I just make a joke and go, you've got to do 30,000 self-investigation, actions, do 30,000 of them. I don't know what the number is, but there is a cumulative effect of that. Each time even if we don't come right to selfless awareness in the process, that little incremental insight stays with you. It's accumulating somewhere, and it's adding to this. That's why the big breakthroughs, where there's this complete sense of clarity around something that was confusing for a long time, they just seem to emerge in the moment, but it wasn't what you were doing in that moment that brought it about. So
you've been doing all these years, or whatever.
What you've been doing all these years, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers?
That sounds familiar, but I can't remember what it was.
He talked about 10,000 hours, and he used the Beatles, Bill Gates, and a couple of other people as examples of people who had put in 10,000 hours of a practice or training in whatever they were doing, and then they became as great as they became because of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think I've heard that concept before with athletes. It was around athletes, and it's like, look, it's all that work that you're doing. It's affecting something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's see. This is from Martin Klein in Germany. I doubt that the sense of me is usually in the middle of people's awareness. Quite the opposite. I would claim that the majority of people are not aware of themselves most of the time, other than a diffuse sensation, but not really conscious in the sense, what do I sense in this moment? What do I feel in this moment? What do I think in this moment? What do you think of this?
Yeah, well, I would say that diffuse sense of, I think what I would say is that most people hang out in the in-between zone. They're not all the way in to the sense of their attention isn't all the way in, and it's not all the way out. There's sort of a vague sense of self back there, but that is the sense of self. It's that diffused sense, kind of the cloud of me-ness that we're talking about. That is the I sense. So I would say, well, that's exactly what we're talking about. And that is something I would probably disagree with them and say, you are aware of that all the time. It just feels like the wallpaper, it's in the background. But you can look at language, look at reference points and everything. Everything is back to you. It's about you. How's this person? Do I want to meet them? What can they do for me? What might come of this meeting? This situation, is it going to benefit me? So you can just look at how the mind and how you think about things moment to moment, day to day, and see how much of it is referencing that vague sense of self.
Okay. Now,
And
did
it
you want
has,
to?
sorry.
I'm sorry. No, you go. What are you
Well,
going
it
to say?
has to be vague too, because it's not
Right. It's subtle. It's vague.
not real.
Right.
It's got to be, it's mirage like, because you go to a center of mirage and you don't find water. So, and yet that's what makes it work. And I'd say that's the divine beauty of it is, man, is it persistent or what? Without it having any real substance to it. So,
I wonder if the sort of absolutely persistent nature of consciousness itself kind of bleeds into or lends a sense of persistency to the I sense, the ahamkara in Sanskrit.
yeah, absolutely. I would say that so I make a joke about this. I say, look, the thing that gives credibility to the I sense cluster, whatever that has to be, a sense of the body, a sense of, location, things like that. The thing that gives credibility to it, that gets it into the party, is the presence of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It's always there. And the mind loops it in. And so it's kind of like, so I talk about it as three strangers and one familiar person to the party that they're going to. They go there and they see these strangers show up in the porch. The person that gets them in the door is the one they know, right? That's what lends credibility to this sense of self. So I think the presence of awareness is, and it's funny because this, between the beginning of looking at the sense of self to the very end, awareness is always there. It's always there to give weight and credibility to the sense of self. It's always present. We just start to realize it's not the things that cluster around it. It's not what the mind clusters together to say, well, this is you. So even this person that was talking about Klein, I think, that was talking about this vague kind of fuzzy sense of self. The thing that's most impacting and significant about that is awareness. But they're somehow, the mind just has this ability to join them together and say, yeah, there you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at a certain stage, they get unjoined. And then at another stage, everything gets merged again. And we go through these phases, building upon each phase. Ken Wilber talks about states and stages. States are like, a state you can get into if you take LSD or if you meditate for 3 hours or this or that. And stages are more like stable platforms that get established eventually and then build upon one another.
Yeah.
So did you want to take us through some process?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Tell us what to do.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk to
Take
us.
my glasses off.
Yeah. So let's see, what's a good place to go into? So normally the person comes and they say, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do. So why don't you tell me what you'd like to take a look at and give me sort of a walk in, because you understand a lot about self-inquiry, self-investigation already. Why don't you take me in, like, how do you look at, if you were going to question, well, who am I?
Yeah.
Just maybe talk me through the beginning.
I don't know if I'm a good
then...
subject because I don't do that. I just kind of.
Okay.
I have had my own process, which has yielded good results. But I've never used this sort of self-inquiry method, really.
So I have an idea. Okay, I'll just dive in.
Okay.
So what makes you feel like what is the most, what gives the strongest sense that you are located there in that chair?
I'm only, let me put it this way. I've said this before, but if I had to describe my experience, I'm everywhere, I'm nowhere, and I'm right here in the chair. And all three of those flavors they're not like distinct, discrete, concrete things. They're more just like flavors that sort of like, if I reflect on my experience, all those components or qualities are there. And the fact that I'm in the chair here and haven't stood up for 2 hours, I feel like stretching, go and get some exercise, but that's certainly not the totality of my experience.
So in what way are you everywhere? And based on we'll say this, based on your direct experience, your direct perception, not so much what you think.
Right. No, it's a sense.
How are you everywhere? Yeah.
Sense of vastness, a sense of non-locality, a non-confinement, just like no boundaries.
Okay. So in that sense, you're not in the body.
No, the body's in me.
The body's in you, exactly. So then, in what sense are you then the body? Do you need to change? Does that need to change in any way?
No.
Is there something about this experience or that thought says, well, you got to be this too?
Don't feel like it needs to change. I feel like all is well and wisely put, and the body is the instrument through which this is lived.
Okay. So this body here now is the instrument through which what is lived?
This experience of, life with all its dimensions, including the vastness and the silence and the activity and everything, the whole kit and caboodle.
Right. So in that sense, though, you in some way need to inhabit the body.
I'd say that the body
to have that experience.
The body is necessary as a vehicle for reality to be a living experience, or you could even put it in terms of God, for God to have a living experience of his or her its unmanifest nature.
Right. Now that's an interesting idea, and it may be true, but is if you're going to just describe your direct experience now, you don't really necessarily experience that, right? Perceive it directly without thought.
No, that's more intellectual. The other stuff I just said earlier is more experiential, but that little bit is kind of a philosophical consideration.
So you said at the beginning, though, in some way you're in and as the body in other ways. But again, if we don't think about it, if we just look for the evidence of that, right? What about direct experience verifies that? Or does it?
Well, it's not like I am in and as the body, although the individual I sense occupies this body, and both seems to animate it and doesn't. It seems to be on automatic, but on the other hand, there seems to be some volition. We never got into the subject of free will in this conversation, but there seems to be some impetus or incentive that some individual faculty initiates. And I'm not just philosophizing here. I'm kind of introspecting on the way I function.
Yeah. So if we can we'll stay with more the perception of these things rather than a description or interpretation.
Okay.
So do you actually have let me just ask, I mean, it sounds like I'm going to be repeating myself, but do you actually have a sense of being in the body as well as this other thing that's going on? But do you feel like you're in the body? Do you have a location? Or it's more like the body's in you, right?
The latter. Okay. Maybe a little bit of both. There is certainly, my senses are in the body. I see out of my eyes, hear out of my ears, here, around or in my immediate environment. But so I'm not constrained by the limits of the body.
Right. So let's take this, my senses. We know there's senses. There's a direct experience of sensory operation going on.
Right.
But what makes a mine? Try to just go into the mine part, the owner. Can you find that the way you find the sense? Is that findable?
Well, it's like,
without thinking about it.
Okay. I guess maybe mind isn't the best word, but they are part of the functioning of this body. Like right now, I can't look out your window and see your tree outside, and you can't see, what's sitting on my desk here. We each function, our bodies function with certain limited range of capacity, and that's not who ultimately we are, but that's the limit that the instrument through which we live life has.
Well,
I'm
so again,
probably intellectualizing too much still.
So that's conceptual.
It is.
So it's tricky because we spend 90.
And I'm not used to doing this with you, so maybe if I sat with you regularly, I would not get into this kind of mind game. But
right. So one of the things I do with this is I try to reverse this habit that we have of relying like 95% on thought to tell us what's going on and 5% on other faculties. And I'm saying, just like we're talking about these other dimensions of existence, there is a dimension of direct perceiving. I'll just use the word perceiving or being aware of, noticing, that has a great dimension to it to know, to understand. And so I say, let's rely on that. We'll call it perception, just staying with perception, staying with aware of, noticing, and maybe 5% thought. So very little thought. So we're going to rely. So there's a really cool teacher, guy I really love, Sailor Bob Adamson.
Oh yeah, I know.
Australian.
Sure.
Yeah. He was always saying this. He'd go, where's the problem if you don't think about it?
Right.
What's happening if you don't think about it? Who are you if you don't think about it? And it was a great tool to just kind of immediately go, okay, so I'm not thinking about it. What do I know? Right. So it would really bring me back to this place of just perceiving. So just staying with this moment. So let's try this. Because I get that this is new to you. So I mean, we're doing fine here.
And most of the stuff we do, we don't have to think about. If I'm riding my bicycle, I don't have to think, rock, go around this rock, don't hit that tree. It's like everything's automatic.
Yeah. Well, there's many more things about that are many more things where that's true too, that we don't need to think about it. It's this incessant thing that's going on. So right now, though, I'm just using your hand. Point to the center of yourself right now. This is the center of the feeling of personal presence. Okay. So does it not have a center? Is that the feeling? Is that the perception? It doesn't. So you don't really have a center.
No. Individuality.
No, that's not true. Or no, you don't have a center.
No. The real you, and sounds like I'm intellectualizing, but this is experience.
Yeah, try not to.
The real you doesn't have a center. It's I'm
talking about just the sense of you now. We're not thinking about the real us or the ultimate us or that kind of thing. The center of. If I said, just say me and point to me, where would you point? It'd be here. It'd be here.
No, I couldn't point anywhere really.
Right. So it doesn't feel like there's. See, here's the thing, Rick. You're already seeing a lot of what I would point you to. You're not in the body. You don't have a sense of location. You said it at the beginning. The body is in you. Yeah. That's not just relatively true. That's absolutely true. Whatever you are, you can feel it right now. The body is in it. The body, mind. If we go into the dimension of mind, which is another dimension other than physical, even that, emotional, it just rests in awareness. I mean, that is your direct experience.
Yeah. I have a friend named Harry Alter who's been on the show 3 times. He said, like, if he's walking down the street, it's that the whole environment is moving through him. It's not like he's going down the street. It's like cars, street, buildings, everything's moving through him.
Right. Well, Douglas Harding he's a teacher in England. Sure. And he used to, really sweet guy. And he described this headless process.
Headless way, yeah.
Was to get you in touch with the presence of awareness and how there's this other dimension of experience. And he would say the same thing, you know, notice that as you're moving down the road moves through you as you're driving along, even the hands. And I remember an acid LSD experience that was like that. And it was just so distinct that the hands were steering the wheel to the car, and that I was not, there was a complete sense of separation. It was the first big flash of that sense of, but now that's what goes on all the time.
Yeah.
So I think the thing is, you're seeing the things you're seeing, we're just putting it in a new context. We're saying, well, you're not identified in the body anymore. That's not, there aren't internal to the body indicators. Most people, if you ask them, point to yourself, they immediately go, me, right? Me, I'm talking about me. Or if they've done a little bit of investigation, they go, me. They say it's up here, it's more back there. But once you get past those, then it's like, well, where are you? So the thing is, if you really reflect on what you're seeing already, the fact that you're already feeling that your awareness, the awareness that holds the body and the room and everything in the field of experience, it holds that. You're already feeling the truth of that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do if we were going to keep working on this is go, well, let's see in what ways there's a little stickiness around that. In what way does it feel like, yeah, but I gotta ground myself to go into this experience. That's an example of, I gotta get closer to a sense of identity. Or if there isn't anything like that going on, it'd be like, well, let's explore the nature of this awareness. I mean, just leave Rick to do his thing. He's got it all taken care of. But in a very real way, you can begin to sense what Rick does has nothing to do with you. It's not your concern. It doesn't need to be monitored. Awareness doesn't need to monitor Rick, make sure he's doing it right. So it's a real trusting and surrendering to just the truth of the way things are. Like what Dan does is not my business, including this conversation. What I am is at best just witnessing that. And Dan seems to be doing just okay at taking care of things. So there's a real felt sense of detachment. It's not the best word, but from, hey, that's cool. It's good. It's very comfortable.
Yeah. I want to throw in a little proviso here, though.
Yeah.
There's a quote from Padmasambhava that I often utter, which is that he said, although my awareness is as vast as the sky, my attention to karma is as fine as a grain of barley flour. Meaning, and Carlos Castaneda's teacher said something similar. He said, a warrior has time only for his impeccability. And you find these characters who are claiming self-realization behaving horribly. I mean, Adi Da is a case in point. You mentioned him. And so a lot of times this kind of perspective, and they may have genuine realizations, but have had there's a lot of cleaning up yet to do. Ken Wilber's talked about waking up, cleaning up, and growing up. And so I just want to emphasize that the stuff we're talking about should never be used as an alibi for inappropriate behavior, saying things like, and I'm quoting someone who actually said this, who was sleeping with all the women who would come to his meetings, I'm not doing it. God is doing it. I'm just a witness, and I'm not involved, and that kind of stuff. That's just BS.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing is there has to be a deep honesty about this, not because honesty is a good morality principle, but because it's so integral to awakening. It's about the truth. So, I think both of the things, both ends of this can fit together. It's another one of those things that seems paradoxical. Yeah, but if you're detached, then maybe you're just going to have sex with your students and take out your frustrations on them and things like that. But I did not find that was the case.
I'm not accusing you of it. I
know. But what I found was that I'm agreeing with you. I think there's a real awareness. So maybe getting back to Patanjali, is that who?
Patanjali? Oh, Padmasambhava.
Padmasambhava. Yeah. That there's that there's an awareness down to this granular level of any kind of, tendency toward manipulation or, taking advantage or any of that. Like I have a clear sense, for example, of students and it's not a boundary there, but there's just certain things it's a discovery that it's not necessary to go certain places. Because it's inevitable with this, anytime you're in a position of authority or a position of that, people will be drawn to you and they will project things but I think that's part of the clarity and maybe wisdom that comes with this. It's like, and I'm speaking from a place from a personal perspective, having made a lot of personal mistakes in life, there were some affairs in there, things like that, big mistakes made, and learned from, right? All adding to a sense of, a better, increased awareness of what are the effects of these things. So I think in a way, psychologically, there's a certain mastering of the psychological level of life that comes along with, but also a detachment that comes, and they go hand in hand. The sense of detachment does not create a sense of like, well, whatever, like you were talking about this one teacher. Yeah, all those affairs, they weren't me, they were somebody else.
Yeah. I'm just saying that one should never use one's sense of detachment as an alibi for inappropriate behavior. Each level of life has its own rules to abide by, you could say, or laws of nature, whatever. And it's like
well, can we know what do you think you can be awake and know what's inappropriate? I think you can. I think you can, even on a level that's deeper and more dimensionally available than the normal person who has a strong code of ethics and moral standard.
Yeah. I mean, or you could be awake to some degree. There are always degrees of it, and use your awakeness as justification for inappropriate behavior, as Adida did very much, sleeping with everybody's wives and taking drugs and all this stuff, and claiming that he was in some kind of crazy wisdom phase.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I mean, I was in the community for about a year.
Yeah.
Way back when. And so that was actually the reason why I left, was a sense of like, they had these stories about mystical experiences, and it turned out he was smoking a cigarette and he accidentally burned somebody with some of the ash or something during a sex act. And I'm going, just tell us that. Don't make up some mystical story.
Glorify it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just really said a lot about, not just about him, but also about the way the community rationalized what was going on.
Yeah.
So
I helped to establish an organization that I'm still involved with called the Association for Spiritual Integrity.
Yeah.
Because I've encountered so many of these instances, and I think it's a real shame. It can really shatter the faith of sincere young aspirant when they encounter things like this, throw them off the track, for a lifetime. So it's important, I think, that spiritual teachers walk their talk, or well, that's not a good line, because their talk might justify this, but just have their act together on all levels and be exemplars. This Gopi Krishna guy that I referred to as a case in point, he worked in this government office, and everybody was corrupt. They were all taking bribes in India, and the contractors were trying to outbid each other with the bribes, and then the contractors would make their money by using shoddy materials, so they'd get more profit, which was endangering people's lives. And Gopi Krishna would not stand for it one iota, even though his family was rather poor and he could have used the money. He just wouldn't play that game. And I found it interesting because here was an example of a guy whose behavior really aligned with his spiritual development in the kind of way I would respect and admire.
Yeah. Yeah. What was his focus in terms of a spiritual approach?
Well, he he started from a young age. He started having profound experiences, and the next thing I'm going to interview will be all about this. But he started having profound experiences, and then he went through various stages where he was meditating a lot and going into deep states of samadhi. And then Kundalini awoke one day, like a rushing
Mhm.
waterfall up his spine, and he
Mm.
started having all these sublime states of awareness and beautiful stuff. And I haven't finished the book, um, but meanwhile, he was living an ordinary life in Kashmir and working in a government office as a mid-level clerk. And it was an interesting story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so I would think, just to loop back in, is um, it seems that this should be a natural part of true spiritual awakening, that it should naturally be integrated
You
into
mean
that.
like
This recognition of, just recognizing basic things of right and wrong.
yeah,
A lot of this comes down to levels of manipulation of those
right.
around you. That manipulation should start feeling very inappropriate.
It should. And it
And if it
amazes me
doesn't,
how
the community should always, I think there should always be an encouragement, just like any dysfunctional situation in families, kids, and they should be able to call the parents out on stuff. I
yeah,
mean, totally believe in, there are no authorities here that aren't beyond reproach. So
exactly.
that has to be a part of it, no matter what the system is. And I'd say the same thing about this. I remember Andrew Cohen that one teacher went through a lot of stuff not
Oh
too
yeah.
long ago. And it really took, and the same thing with Dafrijan, it took people calling him out to get him somewhat in line, but he knew he couldn't. So, and I think in a way that we have to keep that responsibility. It's like, look, if you think there's something unethical or inappropriate going on, confront the teacher. They should not be beyond being confronted about it.
Yeah. Just today, I sent somebody a quote from the Dalai Lama, which I'll read. He said, "A teacher who behaves unethically or asks students to do so can be judged as lacking in ultimate insight," His Holiness said. As
Yeah.
far as my own understanding goes, the two claims that you are not subject to precepts and you are free, these are the result of incorrect understanding. No behavior is free from consequences. For this reason, true wisdom always includes compassion, the understanding that all things and beings are interconnected with and vulnerable to each other. Even though one's realization may be higher than the high beings, His Holiness said, one's behavior should conform to the human way of life. When teachers break the precepts, behaving in ways that are clearly damaging to themselves and others, students must face the situation, even though this can be challenging. Criticize openly. That is the only way. If there's incontrovertible evidence of wrongdoing, teachers should be confronted with it. They should be allowed to admit their wrongs, make amends, and undergo a rehabilitation process. If a teacher won't respond, students should publish the situation in a newspaper, not omitting the teacher's name. The fact that the teacher
Yeah.
may have done so many other good things should not keep us silent.
Yeah. See, on the other hand, I would say that naturally, as a part of the awakening process, you will leave behind certain social orders of things, rules of conduct that are rightfully left behind. So there's many things that are part of cultural, this is what a good person is, this is how a good person acts. Be nice, be kind, but I think that a lot of that will be left behind in the process. But I think this is part of the sophistication of awakening, and when it's effective, is that there's sort of knowing when to revolt, when to say, I don't need to adhere to that any longer. And there's a time to say that I'm accountable for my actions in this.
Yeah.
And I think you should should have a good sense of the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and it can be confusing to somebody looking at it from the outside and go, yeah, but he's not really, he's not acting like a regular person anymore. He's not obeying the laws of. Then I would say a good example of that is my marriage situation. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about what culture says about a marriage. What I care about is our living relationship together. Is it growing? Is it contribute? Is it positive? Is it healthy? Is it and I interpret that based on this situation. And so and this is what always tricky, but it's not important that I stay married or not for the wrong reasons.
Right.
It's not important. I mean, that's not what I attend to. It's like, well, I got to stay married because we've been married, we have a contract. So at the same time, so there's a freedom to just focus on what's meaningful in that. And apparently, it's a relatively mutual situation. So the other person has say in that. If they don't want to be a part of that, they want a traditional marriage, that's their right. And there's no criticism of that, but that may not be something that I'm capable of doing anymore. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is making sense, but
kind of is.
I'm trying to.
Yeah. The thought that comes to mind is that there have been a lot of things that have been cultural norms that have been horrible, like slavery or putting indigenous children in these schools and taking them away from their parents at the age of 5. I just heard about this on the radio this morning, and whipping them if they spoke their native language, and then the priests and nuns are sexually abusing them. All kinds of things that have been sort of like accepted by society that are terrible. So who would want to go away? We should rebel against those things. But then I think what it really boils down to is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Just don't harm people. Mm-hmm. And that would probably be the greatest compass to follow.
Well, and I would say, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of sensing these other dimensions of things, there is a dimension of experience where right behavior is perfectly evident, aside from any thought I have about
spontaneously.
It's like, yes, you can feel the rightness of it. And that's not just fluffy thinking. That is a deeper sense of right and wrong. And I think that's many of these rules that have kind of been handed down and just memorized and embodied without really reflecting on the deeper meaning of it, I think have lost that. And so that's part of this rejection. It's like, look, I don't care what people say. I don't care what they say is right. What I care about is what I feel, what I have a direct experience of, what I intuitively know to be right and wrong. And it's never really led me astray.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And what always puzzles me, and we won't drag this out too long, but it's kind of interesting. But what always puzzles me is these guys who are really impressive in many ways. They glow in the dark. They've got so much, presence and charisma and all, who are behaving reprehensibly in many ways. And my best understanding of it at this time is that there's such a thing as a partial awakening. Certainly in Kundalini terms, it's called deflected rising, where Kundalini rises to a great extent, but gets off on the wrong track. Right. And it can endow you with charisma and eloquence and, all siddhis even, and yet you are not enlightened. And a lot of the lower chakras haven't really been cleaned up properly. And when they start acting up, all hell breaks loose.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. And that's part of, I think I tried to allude to that at the beginning. There was certainly a lot of attention to that early on in the spiritual process of really looking at, not just looking at conditioning and reactiveness and fears and things like that, but also really reflecting on, well, what's truly right?
Yeah.
How do I know? Because it's changing. Like you said, slavery at one point, everybody, what, you don't have a slave?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Washington, Jefferson, all these guys owned slaves.
Yeah. So clearly, that even with, fairly intelligent, wise men and women, there was an acceptance of a condition that just seems so obviously not acceptable. So in a way, I think what we're talking about is something that transcends history and culture and society, and just considering the possibility that there's another way of knowing right and wrong and truth and falseness and so on.
Yeah. Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching and also some other scriptures say that if a society is really in tune with the Tao, really enlightened, then you hardly need any government, you hardly need any laws, just people all behave spontaneously. But when the Tao degenerates or crumbles down to a low level, then you need all these laws and rules because people aren't just going to behave spontaneously rightly.
Yeah, I like that. That actually is a good description.
Well, we've done a bit of a marathon here. We should probably wrap it up, but it's fun talking to you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for inviting me on the show.
So I'll have a link to your website on your BatGap page, and people can get in touch with you through that. If you want, I can even put your email on there, but you might get swamped. So maybe you'd prefer that they go through the contact form on your website.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah. And you do you work with people remotely, or do they have to come to North Carolina?
No, I do. I'm working with a few people. It's something about being in person is just nice, so it just it's much more effective. So I encourage people. I usually, if I'm working with them remotely, they got to really want to do the work, So, and also I like to see them every once in a while, so we figure out a way to have them come
get
out
together. Yeah.
So we've got a few people doing that, but
good. And also have a link to your book on your BatGap page so people can check that out.
Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dan.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed spending time with you.
Yeah, same here.
If I ever get down to North Carolina, I'll pop in.
Yeah, I'd love to see you.
Yeah.
And Irene.
Well, thank you to those who've been listening or watching. And the next interview, as I mentioned, will be with this fellow who was a close student of Gopi Krishna for quite a few years. His name is Michael Bradford. And then we have an upcoming interviews page on BatGap if you want to see what else is scheduled. So see you next time.